Hello and welcome to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. Thanks for joining me today. I am a double board certified critical care physician and anesthesiologist, and this is a podcast where I talk about medicine. I sometimes talk about politics. I always talk about books, history, economics, lots of different things. So thanks for joining me again today. If this is your first time, welcome, and if not, thanks for joining me back. The topic for today is going to be a little bit of pulmonary physiology, some VQ mismatching stuff, some dead space ventilation. And I actually think I want to talk about right heart and left heart mismatching as well in under mechanical circulatory devices and how that can impact pulmonary edema and oxygenation as well. So we'll get to that in a minute. First, we're going to start off with hot takes from the void. This is where I look at news headlines right in the moment, right now, and I give you my hot take. It's always sobering and depressing, so join me. Well, the date today is, what is it? Cinco de Mayo, right? Yeah, it's May 5th, 2025. The big thing that's been in the news that I just saw is a woman on a playground. If you haven't seen it, it's a mother with a toddler on her hip, and she's at a playground, and she's yelling at the camera, the person who's filming, and she had just apparently allegedly called a 5-year-old black kid, or I should say non-white, I guess, the N-word, and the cameraman was like, why don't you say it again? And so she did, and she started just saying that, and just very smugly, unabashedly bigoted, racist, and not really caring. And that was a video, very egregious and highly offensive. And since then, she has created a charitable account because she got outed, and she's raised like $500,000, which really has weighed on me. That is really, really difficult. Really difficult to see somebody so overtly hateful and racist profiting and having so much support. It's really hard. And to me, not a lot has really changed since civil rights era. Racism and bigotry has just gone into hiding a little bit more, and now it's been unleashed. Those seeds of racism and bigotry have always been part of America, and now it's just more in your face. Not much has changed in this country, but that was really disheartening to see somebody be so overtly hateful and then get support from thousands of people. Really difficult to see. Donald Trump put up a White House post of him in an AI image as the Pope. He has jested about being the next Pope. And like always, he jokes about something, but is also serious about it. He would, if he were, deemed Pope, he would gladly accept that position, right? So he's just like any abuser. They're joking until they're not, right? Oh, it's a joke, unless it's not a joke. Just like his classic abuser mentality, right? And he's all about outraging, and that's all he does, right? A lot of his power is derived from outraging the sensibilities of normal people, and then using the attention that is provoked from that outrage to just occupy all of our brains. And he did it again, and he always does it, right? His power is derived from that, and his power is derived from destroying convention and precedents. By not obeying convention and precedents, that is a huge source of his power. And you're just seeing it on display over and over and over and over again. And I refuse to be outraged anymore. I just accept that he is just going to be doing these things. There's not much we can do about it. But he, as I said, he is joking until he's not. That is what an abuser does. That is what a sexual predator does. They're joking until they're not. Or they are serious until they are called out, and then they're joking, right? It's a huge tool of oppressors, abusers, and a fascist like Donald Trump. All right, let me just run through some more headlines. From Reuters, Trump tariff order on movies leaves film industry flummoxed. So now Trump's done a tariff on movies, whatever. He's just continuing his tariff assault and his isolationist and protectionist policies on the United States. And shooting all of ourselves in the foot in the process, and that's just a continuation of that. Here's a headline from CNN. Netanyahu promises to move Gaza's population after Israel approves plan to, quote, conquer the enclave. So I don't have much to say about that, except that Netanyahu and his government, ever since about 1949, have tried their best to ethnically cleanse Israel of Palestinian people. And him saying he promises to move Gaza's population after Israel approves plan to conquer the enclave. That's just ethnic cleansing. It's just classic ethnic cleansing. They've been doing it for 50 plus years, longer. And this is the biggest, largest assault that's probably happened probably since 1949. I mean, I'm no expert on the history of Israel, but what's been going on in Gaza is genocide, and it is an attempt at overt ethnic cleansing. And, you got to call a spade a spade. And not Netanyahu's an evil man, and what he's doing is evil. He's destroying the lives of many innocent people, men, women, and children. They're not just quote-unquote militants, right? He is trying to remove the Palestinian population. They've been trying to do it all along, right? And this is just a new iteration of that. Here's another one from HomelandSecurity.gov. DHS announces historic travel assistance and stipend for voluntary self-deportation. That is obviously to catfish people into turning themselves in so that they'll get deported. So the ICE doesn't have to find them, and they will obviously not give any financial support or travel assistance to anybody. This is like when the FBI or whatever sends a bunch of like wanted people. They send a notice like, "Hey, you want a boat?" or whatever, and they all show up for the boat and they get arrested. That's what that is. Obviously. Here's from NPR News. Trump says he will reopen Alcatraz for the most ruthless and violent prisoners. You don't need to. The prison industrial complex in the United States is well funded and robust, both publicly and privately well funded. There's plenty of prisons, federal penitentiaries in the United States. You don't need to open up Alcatraz, right? You don't need to do that. This is obviously for optics, so he looks like a hard ass, right? He looks like the president of Law and Order, even though he's a convicted felon. So we have more prisoners than any advanced country in the world, right? And we don't need to open up a new prison. This is all just a gesture and optics of that goes along with his trying this ruthless strongman persona that he's trying to. Doesn't matter if Alcatraz is opened up or not. It's not going to change how incredibly ruthless this country is towards criminals to begin with, and how much we criminalize our population to begin with. Right? We're already like this. We're already what he's trying to convey with this. We already are, right? And tons of private companies profit off of it as well. Tons of private companies profit. There's many books you can read about that topic. What else? Collections from Wall Street Journal. Collections coming for millions of student loan borrowers. That probably has to do with pausing on student loan forgiveness for many borrowers and making sure that those debts are paid. It's banal at this point to point out the criticism with debt forgiveness that's gone on for corporations, and but it won't go for private citizens and their education. Basically, if you're an educated person, if you take out student loans, you make money, you pay higher income taxes, you have to pay your student. It's punitive. You're basically punitive for being an educated professional in this country. There's punitive measures towards you, and this is just another one of them. All right, that's it for Hot Takes from the Void. I can't do that for very long. It's just too depressing. I just can't. All right, let's get to the topic today. So it's going to be kind of a grab bag of talking about pulmonary physiology and pathophysiology, some VQ mismatching, the difference between pulmonary shunt, VQ mismatch, dead space ventilation. How are they clinically? What do we do with these things clinically? How are they clinically relevant? And maybe we'll talk about lung trauma and mechanical trauma. esophageal manometry, and mismatch between RV and LV, right ventricular and left ventricular mismatch during mechanical circulatory support. I'll see if I can get to all those topics. That's a lot in the short time that I have here, but let's see what I can do here. All right, let's just start with the VQ mismatch. So V over Q, right? So if you have a piece of paper, you're sitting there. I'm sure you're familiar with these concepts already. But V stands for ventilation. Q stands for perfusion. V is how much air you're moving through the alveoli of the lungs, and that's in the numerator, and the denominator is perfusion. That's how much blood is flowing in the capillary beds of the lungs. Okay, so if you have V over Q, right, and let's say Q equals 1, V equals 1, and Q is approaching 0. Let's say it's almost 0. What does that mean? So if ventilation is 1, that means you got plenty of ventilation. And if perfusion is 0, that means you don't have perfusion. And that, 1 divided by something close to 0 is approaching infinity, which means high VQ mismatch. Okay? High VQ mismatch is dead space ventilation. Here's the way to think about dead space ventilation. Here's the quick and easy way. It's something in the blood vessels. It's something obstructing flow in the capillary beds. That's dead space ventilation. You're ventilating, but it's dead. You're ventilating the lungs, but you're not having any gas exchange. So the classic thing is like a pulmonary embolism, right? Pulmonary embolism is obstructing flow through the blood, the perfusion of the blood to the lungs, and you're ventilating, but it's all dead space. You're not having any gas exchange because of that. So that could be pulmonary embolism. It could be fat embolism. It could be cement embolism. How do you get cement embolism? Well, if you have an orthopedic surgeon puts a bunch of cement in your bone and hammers it away, that can embolize into the bloodstream. So that's quick and dirty. That's dead space ventilation. Now let's take that VQ, okay, and let's make the V approaching 0, the ventilation, and the Q approaching is 1, so you're perfusing fine. Well, that 0 divided by 1 is something close to 0, so that's low VQ mismatch, and that's a shunt. That's intrapulmonary shunt. The quick and easy way to remember that is, what is that? It's anything that's in the alveoli or the airway, okay? How many things can be in the airway? Well, you can have anything in the airway down from the alveoli all the way up into a breathing tube or a breathing circuit. And it's obstruction there. So that's a low VQ. That's what we call that shunt. So the quickest way to remember this is a shunt is something in the airway. Dead space ventilation is something in the blood supply of the lungs. That's a quick, easy way to remember it. They both cause problems with the gas exchange. They both can be causes of hypoxemia. Okay. And there are different ways to compensate that. One thing we should talk about is what is it called? HPV, hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. Which, let me get to that in a second. Well, let's come with an example. Okay, let's. I'm gonna in the OR. Every so often, there's something called a double lumen breathing tube that we use to isolate a lung during surgery. So let's say somebody has, they're getting a VATS procedure, a video-assisted thoracoscopy, where a surgeon needs to actually look at the lung. They take a camera through the rib cage, they go through the ribs, and they look at the surface of the lung, and they need surgical exposure of the lung. Like they're doing a wedge resection, let's say they're doing that, because the patient has cancer and they're taking some lung out. Well, you need to drop the lung to expose that lung so the surgeon can actually work. Okay, so we put in you can do this one of two ways: a double lumen breathing tube or a bronchial blocker. I prefer a double lumen breathing tube, usually a 37 French for a woman, a 39 French for a man. A double lumen breathing tube, I won't get in too much into the specifics of that, but I put that in, and now I have 2 lumens, and I can now drop a lung. Okay, I can isolate a lung. What I mean drop a lung is I stop ventilating one of the lungs. So let's think about this. I put in a double lumen breathing tube, and then I let's say I stop ventilating the right lung. Okay, what did I do? What am I doing? Well, I stopped ventilating half the lung. Is that part of the lung still being perfused? Yes, it is. So what kind of hypoxemia could I inflict? That would be shunt, right? So I'm creating a shunt. And now, let's say I do that, and now the patient starts desatting at 85%. Why? Why are they desatting? I mean, it's kind of a dumb question to ask, but they're having too much of a shunt fraction. They have too much blood flowing to that right side of the lung still, and it's not participating in a gas exchange, and then it's coming back to the heart, and it's creating an admixture of deoxygenated blood, right? That's a shunt fraction. So you have too much shunt fraction of deoxygenated blood returning to the heart, and it's making the patient hypoxic. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, there's a couple things you can do. One of the things you can do is just put the patient good lung down. Okay, so what I mean by that is the lung that's good, we'll say, in this case, I'm ventilating it. You put it down. You make it more gravity dependent. So you put that dependent side down. And what that does is it changes the ventilation distribution and the perfusion, the perfusion distribution, right? So you'll have more blood flow going to the well-ventilated lung. You'll get rid of that shunt fraction and you'll oxygenate better. Okay, so that's one thing that happens. And you do that anyway for a surgery like this, because usually you put that good side, that ventilated side lung down and the bad lung up. That's getting surgical exposure to get surgery on. So that naturally is happening. And then what also kicks in is hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction, or HPV. And it takes about 20 minutes to kick in. What happens is the perfusion to the bad lung that's no longer getting ventilated, you have a natural compensatory mechanism where that capillary bed will start constricting off and it'll start shunting blood flow to the better aerated lung. And that does take about 20 minutes. So if I do this to somebody and they're satting like 85%, what do? I wait. You just wait. Put the good side lung down. And that HPV will kick in about 20 minutes. And this is not just a textbook thing. It's real. This is a real clinical thing. HPV does work. It does help a lot. A medication that blunts HPV. Okay, let's talk about that. Sometimes let me give you another like example here. Let's say I'm in the cardiac ICU, and I have a patient who's just had surgery, and they're up in the ICU, and they still have a breathing tube, and I'm trying to get the breathing tube out. And let's say they're on clofidipine, which is a calcium channel blocker, and they're desatting to like 80%, and their chest X-ray looks fine. They have no lung disease. Why is this happening? Well, what does clofidipine do? It's a calcium channel blocker. It is dilating. What's going on is it's counteracting HPV, the hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. You're having an unwanted pharmacological effect on a wanted physiological need that's happening. So you can have atelectatic lung that's been down from being on long run of cardiopulmonary bypass, and you have HPV that's clamping down and stopping perfusion to a poorly aerated lung, and then you're giving a medication that is dilating that lung vasculature, and now you're having more of a shunt fraction. So what do? You shut off the clofidipine. Totally works. Seen this many times. Someone in this specific setting I'm talking about, you shut that off, and it gets rid of that shunt effect that's happening, that maldistribution of flow. All right, now let's go back to shunting, intrapulmonary shunt. That's the most common reason someone's going to be hypoxic. Okay, so let's say someone has really bad pneumonia, and that pneumonia is causing a bunch of inflammatory tissue to fill up the alveoli. Okay, you have something in the airway. That's shunt. It's causing hypoxia. And let's say the inflammation is getting worse, and that patient is getting infiltrates all over their lungs, and they're now hypoxic. You put them on nasal cannula. You put them on that doesn't do anything. You put them on high flow nasal cannula. What is that? That has higher flow and higher FiO2 percentage. You have a better chance of getting a better FiO2 in there. That doesn't work. You put them on a non-rebreather maybe. You have them both. Their work of breathing is terrible. Right? Work of breathing really matters whether you need to escalate your oxygen delivery. It's not just, let's say someone's on high flow nasal cannula and they're satting 87%, but their work of breathing is normal. Does that person need to be intubated? Maybe not, right? Tolerating permissive hypoxia is something that you need to consider. Maybe they're just okay with hypoxemia, hemoglobin saturation of 87%. If their breathing respiratory rate's only 12 or 15, then maybe you can get away with not putting your breathing tube in. The danger is traumatizing lung that's already threatened and traumatizing it with wild swings of transpulmonary pressures. Okay, that's the kind of the meat of really what I want to talk about here is you traumatize the lung. By a patient can have patient self-inflicted lung injury, something we call PSILI, patient self-inflicted lung injury, where they're giving themselves volume trauma because they're taking these huge breaths, right? And they're distending their alveoli. and they're causing trauma that way. If you do that for hours and hours and hours and hours, you're going to inflame your lungs more. You will. And that can cause ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which has very high mortality, right? This is how people die of COVID. It's how they did die during the pandemic, which did happen, okay? I know. It happened, okay? I know lots of people out there I know you know that. If you're listening to my podcast, you know that. But there's lots of people, politicians and podcast hosts and stuff that are trying to gaslight you into thinking the COVID pandemic was not a pandemic. It was a serious deal. It was a big thing. Once the vaccines are out, the vast majority of people that were dying and were on ECMO were unvaccinated. The vaccines help prevent severe COVID hospitalization and death. They simply do. That's a fact. Anyway, so if a patient can cause trauma to the lungs if their work or breathing is great, with a high respiratory rate, a high ventilation, high tidal volumes, they can. So then maybe that's when you decide to put in a breathing tube. Now you put them on positive pressure ventilation. Now you're in danger of causing them trauma to the lungs from the ventilator, and that can kill people. You absolutely can cause alveolar strain and harm and damage lungs, and someone can die from that. So you need to once you have someone on a ventilator, you need to minimize the trauma to the lungs from that ventilator, while also keeping their blood oxygenated to a reasonable level to keep them alive. And the point of doing this is to bridge them to survive, for the lungs to improve on their own while you are supporting their life. So once you put something on a ventilator, now you can have a high gradient in your transpulmonary pressures. What does that mean? It means your airway pressures are too high, and on the other side of the lungs, the pressure is too low, and so you have a high gradient, and that causes trauma to the lungs. Okay, so how do you minimize that? You have to keep your driving pressures low, your plateau pressures low. You want to keep your plateau pressures less than 30, and your driving pressures less than 15. What are driving pressures? That's simply your plateau pressures minus your PEEP, your pulmonary and expiratory pressures. Okay. So you got to keep we know that based on just decades of research to do that. But you also have to keep the mechanical power, the actual joules that you're delivering to those lungs, you have to keep it low. And one of the things, what you should do is, if you're interested, go Google mechanical power equation to the lungs. And you'll get this kind of long equation. Maybe it's not very clinically useful, but you can see what goes into that equation. One of the main things that goes into that equation is respiratory rate. If you have a high respiratory rate, that's up to 35, even if you're doing lung protective ventilation like I'm talking about, with driving pressures low and plateau pressures low and a high PEEP, you still are delivering a bunch of power and joules to those lungs that can harm the lungs and cause damage. Okay, let me get to one of the main points I was wanted with this. So let's say you intubate somebody and for ARDS, so from pneumonia, and now they're really crashing, and now they're satting 70% or 60%, and they look blue. What do you do? Well, you need to stabilize that patient, make sure they're paralyzed, because what does paralysis do? When you give some paralysis, it stops their oxygen consumption. It decreases it because the patient's no longer moving around. And then it also makes sure you don't have any vent desynchrony, so the patient's not fighting the vent, which is also causing huge problems, right? So you paralyze them. That will help with that. That helps dramatically. You hand bag them to really deliver as much pressure. Now, this is where you can start causing trauma to the lungs. But the last thing you can grease for is inhaled nitric oxide, okay? Or other inhaled vasopulmonary dilators. That's what inhaled nitric oxide is. It selectively, it goes through the lungs, and it only goes into the lungs that are well aerated. And selectively it'll go there, and then it dilates the pulmonary vasculature bed. So you improve your VQ mismatching. So that's an important tool in severe and profound refractory hypoxemia that can happen with patients with ARDS, is inhaled nitric oxide. Now, there's research that's saying, hey, maybe it doesn't really help with mortality, and that's probably true. But it definitely can get you out of a pinch when someone's about to have cardiac arrest from hypoxemia. Okay. Let me just touch on esophageal manometry as well. So let's say, okay, someone has ARDS. They're profound, they have crazy shunting. They have really bad VQ mismatch, like I'm talking about from ARDS. And your respiratory therapist is like, hey, their plateau pressures are 35 and these driving pressures are 22 and my PEEP is 18. I don't know what to do now. Well, this patient probably has a high BMI. They're probably quite obese, likely. And when that happens, what's going on is their chest wall compliance, right? There's lung compliance and then there's chest wall compliance. These are two totally different things. Someone's chest wall compliance can be very poor. Remember, compliance is how easily something moves per unit of pressure you give it, how much volume of expansion you get per unit of pressure. So, like a balloon is highly compliant, a propane tank is not compliant at all. So, someone who's obese and has a lot of fat tissue around their chest and their belly, they don't have chest wall compliance, and you're fighting that with your vent. And so you have to have more of a driving pressure to even oxygenate the lungs. And you have to have more of a higher plateau pressure. So my first instinct when I hear that is it's probably not causing patient harm, because it's all about the transpulmonary pressures that cause harm to lungs. Well, if someone has a bunch of back pressure on their airway pressures in the form of a bunch of fat tissue and poor chest wall compliance, their actual transpulmonary pressure is lower. How do you prove that? You in an esophageal manometry. This is a pressure probe that goes down in the esophagus and acts as a surrogate for pleural pressure. And then what you can do is you compare your airway pressures to your esophageal pressures. And if it's not a huge gradient, then you can be like, okay, I don't think I'm harming the patient with this vent settings. So we can continue, even though they're outside of what we consider to be safe. I can now say they're safe because I've measured the esophageal pressure as a surrogate for pleural pressure, and I believe the transpulmonary pressures are low. So I'll continue this vent strategy. And I will use it. You got to make sure you have a respiratory therapist that's familiar with this technique, knows how to set it up reliably, how to calibrate it so you're getting reliable pressures. The thing with esophageal manometry is it's not a true pleural pressure. ARDS is often a heterogeneous disease. You have it doesn't affect the lungs globally the same, right? So it has caveats, but it's an important piece to remember. And then to finish this discussion I don't know why I've turned this discussion to ARDS. I love ARDS. If somebody is, so you also prone patients. Why do we prone them? Well, there's a couple reasons. When you prone a patient, we believe that it helps redistribute that airway pressure. It opens up lungs, and so you have better aeration, so you don't have micro traumas going on, regional trauma to your lung tissue. You prone patients for that reason. It also probably helps with RV function when you do that. There's some fairly good stuff. They're okay studies that can show that. And then we also know proning helps mortality. So not only does it improve oxygenation, but it helps mortality. You should prone people with severe ARDS, even if their oxygenation is okay. You should prone them because it helps them survive. We know that from pretty robust evidence. Anyway, let's say someone is prone, paralyzed, on inhaled nitric oxide. They're obviously mechanically ventilated. Let's say the SATs are only like 80%. The respiratory rate is 35. You have permissive hypercarbia because you're keeping the TATA volumes low, 4 to 8 cc's per kg. Let's say their PCO2 is 60. Their pH is 7.1, their PaO2 is 40. That's when you need to consider for venovenous ECMO. And you need to consider it early, a day or two into their disease process. If it goes beyond 7 days, those lungs have been hammered way too much with mechanical power, and you've probably destroyed the lungs. The whole reason to put them on VV ECMO is then to really rest their lungs, and then support their lives on the ECMO machine while you're resting their lungs. That's the reason you put them on VV ECMO. Whew. All right. That's it. I wanted to talk more about that stuff, but that's all the time I have. There's obviously much more to say, but I hope that was helpful. Let's move to an email. This email's from Terry, last name withheld. I got this just a few days ago. The title of the email was "We Need You." And Terry says, I can understand why you would leave social media. It's definitely a waste of time, but your political POV is so important. I realize that you believe that they, MAGA, can't be reasoned with, but if you could even convince 1 or 2% that they've made a huge mistake. You are the perfect voice of truth. You are incredibly intelligent, well-read, well-spoken, and explain things so clearly and so well. I don't know, I think there must be a rational voice for truth. I wonder why some of us were so brainwashed, and some see what's really happening. I feel like the truth tellers must continue or we are lost. I love your podcast, but not everyone listens to podcasts. Just think about it. You really are the voice of reason out there. God knows we need you. Terry. Terry, thank you for your very high praise email. I do appreciate it. And, I will think about it. I don't see myself going back to social media. It was just too much of a just personal liability in my life, and I just didn't like it. And I do want to be that voice of reason for people, but I just can't do it at a toll to my, I just can't risk threats to me or my family. Not that I was ever threatened by anybody, but just there comes a lot of discord with having a large social media account, particularly when you talk about medicine and politics now, and medicine is political now, and it just gets too much, and you got to step away. And just like anybody else, my family is, I'm a parent and a husband is more important than anything. So, maybe in another life where I didn't have other responsibilities, I would be on social media more, but I don't see myself returning to doing that. It's just not worth it to me personally. And I know, I've gotten many emails like this from lots of people, but I just don't see it happening. But I do appreciate the encouragement, and I will promise to think about it. All right, let's get to some book reviews. First book I want to talk about is nonfiction. It's called Why Taiwan Matters, a short history of a small island that will dictate our future. Oh, wait, I already talked about the book in episode 70. Never mind. Let me find a different book. All right, this book is called Money Lies in God by Catherine Stewart. I won't spend a lot of time in this book because it's about current politics. And I've read many books like this. This is just more current. It was a difficult and infuriating book to read. It's updated book, as I said, recently published. When was it? February 18th of this year. And it's about the rise and hostile takeover of right-wing Christian nationalists of the U.S. government. This book is highly researched, it names names, and it clearly lays out a coordinated and well-funded effort by billionaires, Christian nationalists, and Catholic Church to roll out what are essentially the aims of Project 2025. This book really talks about how it's not just a difference of opinions about public policy or social values anymore. What's going on is literally a fascist Christian nationalist coalition that is fueled by reactionary nihilism, and it would like to restructure the American government and society and then sit at its head of power forever. Okay? That is not hyperbole, and you know that. There isn't much hope beyond the fact that lots of the people recently put into power are both stupid and incompetent and not as monolithic as they appear. That's one of the main points the author makes. They are a coalition, not as harmonious as they appear. Hopefully a combination of their incompetence, their vanity, their rivalry will help fracture the movement over the next few years. The bigger issue is that this neo-fascist movement is built on the politics of consumption and zero-sum mentality. Something must always be consumed, and there must always be a loser for this fascist movement to have life. Destruction is the natural course of this movement. Given how weak the opposition party is, I don't see a quick way out of American neo-fascism. I know I've said that many times. I'm like a broken record. This is a good book, but only read it if you have the mental fortitude, something which is in short supply at the moment. But it's called Money Lies in God, Catherine Stewart. It's very well researched. This person knows what she's talking about. All right, the only other book I want to talk about is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So I just reread this. My first experience with this was as a teenager, as most people are when they read this book. I enjoyed it then, and I loved it even more now. This book fits snugly on the shelf next to Brave New World. Fahrenheit 451 is certainly about authoritarian censorship, but I would argue, after just rereading it, that this book is much more about the atomization and the fracturing of families and society at large with emotional infantilization, I don't know if I may have made that word, and then the total collapse of critical thought. That's what this book is about, more to me. Here's a quote from the book. What did you give to the city, Montauk? Ashes. What did the others give to each other? Nothingness. So Guy Montauk is the main character, and his journey is fast and dramatic. He begins as a fireman who finds dissenters who harbor a contraband of the state, which are books, and then he burns them. He goes on his merry way doing this until he starts actually thinking about the people who have books and their tendency to actually stand up for something, which piques his interest. He contrasts that with his vapid marriage and home life, and he swiftly becomes disillusioned with his life, and he starts being curious about books and laments even what he's been doing. He says, it took some man, a lifetime maybe, to put some of his thoughts down, looking around at the world and life, and then I came along in 2 minutes and boom, it's all over. That's talking about how he's a fireman. And it doesn't take much time for him to realize the profundity of the perversion of human life that has happened under the corporate state, which he lives under. Here's another quote from the book. Cram them full of non-combustible data. Chock them so damn full of facts they feel stuff, but absolutely brilliant with information. Then they'll fill their thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy because facts of that sort don't change. The thing is, what's interesting about this book is I'm not really sure how much Montauk actually reads after he's curious about books. It's just the desire to live with his thoughts more fully and experience his emotions more deliberately and share that experience in words with others, both past and present and future. That is what sparks his transformation. It's not actual any words or books that actually sparks his transformation. And his transformation was a neck-breaking wreck that devolved from being a husband who was gainfully employed to being chased by a robotic hound down a river over the course of about a day. Here's another quote. That was all he wanted after his transformation. Some sign that the immense world would accept him and give him the long time he needed to think all the things that must be thought. This book ends with Montauk's life completely shattering, but being born into a new echelon of profundity and immensity that eclipses everything from his prior husk of a life. The only issue is that personal pathologies that he experiences were not just a one-off. They are systemic. And the hens come home to roost when modernity is bombed off the face of the planet before his eyes. I'm not sure about the lesson here, if there is one, only that once the train leaves the station, it cannot be stopped. One of the biggest lessons from this book for me is not that waking up to your society's ills is necessarily complicated. It's just that it's rare. You don't need to be particularly bright or intelligent to understand, but willing to understand the world from another's perspective. That's what it is. The character in this book, he was just rare. Not enough people stand up and think critically. And that's the power of the written word. That's what it did to him. It's a beautiful book, beautiful prose. Ray Bradbury is amazing. And this book is ripe for a reread. I would do it. If you haven't read it, you should. It's short, and it's very well done. All right. Well, thanks for joining me for another episode. My email address is icudrecmo@gmail.com. You can email me about anything. I usually will read people's emails on the show anonymously unless you tell me otherwise. Give me any ideas for the show. Sometimes I get bored and I don't record episodes because I just don't really have anything to say. So send me ideas. I have a new book coming out. I'm also an author. My pen name is Wick Welker. Wick, W-E-L-K-E-R. I have a new book coming out May 15th called Dark Prophet. It is the third book in a series called Dark Law. It's a science fantasy epic adventure. The galaxy is dying. A robot and a thief try to fix it, and many things happen. It's very dark, gloomy, and it's quite violent. But it's also kind of a fantasy adventure. So check that out. It's coming out May 15th. Audiobooks are coming out as well for that. I've written other books. You can check it out. I'll link here on the podcast. You can visit my social media accounts, which I do not do anything with, but they're still up. ICU Doctor TikTok on Instagram and ICU Doctor on TikTok. I have a small Blue Sky account, an author account. It's at Wick Welker. You can follow me there. Anyway, thanks for joining me again. I'll see you next time.